what's happened is her medicine signed off from computers and the family health department. And actually, the institute foundation and Wheeler, they created kind of a little tiny complimentary care to feel in touch. And she really wanted, I know her, and she wants that sort. And she really wanted to start being active when she was in the ANC. And so what might be interesting is for the three of us, I think she would love it.
Because what was driving me was when I was much younger, when Nixon was in China.
Yeah.
I remember Dan Rather was in Asia, and he was speaking to a woman who was an acupuncture with electronic pulse and jobs.
Yeah. Well, that was a big trip because I can't remember the name, but Reston, one of Nixon's people needed an appendectomy, and part of his anesthetic was acupuncture, and it made the news, and that's what helped bring acupuncture. So it really came in on
Well, I remember watching that. He said to her, what does it feel like? Because she was Italian, and she said, there was an electronic pulse being with it. And she said, imagine I'm on the edge of the ocean. Wow. So, because it would take, for all the steps they've done,
well, and acupuncture is normal medicine in Germany and India. It's like my boyfriend lived in Taiwan and said, we just ate in hospital. So you are tuned in and having something activated. But we have a myopic view in the stage of everything.
Well, I'll give you
we'll set that up.
And if you have another question before things get hectic, I'll just write down my home number.
Actually,
wait a second. I may have put in my choice. I changed courses. Yes, the house number. Yeah, so let's get together and talk. And see if we can take this.
You know my language.
Yes, I did, and I have. I'm going to cry. So let's go. I have such guilt. Your mother was your mother, and I just assumed
I don't care.
Okay, but she wasn't. And then the last time we spoke, she was visiting you. I guess your brother someplace.
Yes,
she was
right near the end.
Yes, and I think, of course, I didn't know that she was no longer winning, and she wanted to talk. But I really wasn't interested to take, and she wanted to talk. And so,
Please don't. There's no point.
I know.
There's no point.
I should do this to you.
You're not doing it.
But it wasn't just something funny. I'll let you go.
She's probably on drugs anyway. She wanted to talk to everyone at that moment.
Well,
she was on drugs.
But I do have to tell you that's your father, too. But I wasn't going to have this.
You can tell me some other time. I'm going to see if I can get a little water.
Warm. Huh? Yeah.
I told some people.
Yeah, it's streaming live. You know, I don't know where it's streaming. I don't actually know. I just know that we're streaming, yeah. But they should be able to find it.
Oh, you got it. Oh,
Here we are.
Do you want me to move my books? No problem. Anything for you.
I won't talk, I promise.
You can talk.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's just going out to the internet, you know, the whole world.
keep a close eye so we
I have 4. I have 10. Down also.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Guernsey, and I'm President and Dean of Albany Law School. I want to welcome all of you to the 17th annual Kate Stoneman Day here at the school. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, the Honorable Patricia Wald. We're especially privileged to have so many of the esteemed members of the bench and bar with us. And while I don't want to go through the audience and introduce everybody, I do want to give a special recognition to our Judge Graffio from the New York Court of Appeals. My personal thanks to all of you for your continued support of this and many of the other programs at Albany Law School. For those of you who are new to the Kate Stoneman program, this event honors the significant contributions of women to the law and is named for the first woman to graduate from Albany Law School, Catherine Stoneman, class of 1898. Kate Stoneman challenged the law of her day and became the first woman admitted to practice law in the state of New York in 1886. More recently, I had the pleasure of representing the law school 2 years ago when Kate Stoneman was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. And this is one of many of the last things I'm doing before I step down as dean in June. And certainly over the last 9 years, Kath and I have grown to appreciate how important a part Kate Stoneman Day is for us at Albany Law School, and that allows us to celebrate the contributions of those who advance women in in the legal profession. And so I want to thank you all for joining us. It's now my pleasure to introduce Professor Mary Lynch, co-chair of the Kate Stoneman Day program. Mary.
I am honored to be your host for this year's Kate Stoneman program. And our fabulous communications director, Dave Singer, tells me that we are being webcast live. So if any of you want to text your friends who are stuck in traffic out on Holland Avenue, or they may do that. And after that, please put off your cell phones so that it doesn't interfere with the communications, or it doesn't ring in the middle. And I forgot to do mine, but when I sit back down, I'll do that. Okay. Tonight, 3 women will join our prestigious circle of Kate Stoneman Award recipients, bringing to 60 the total number of extraordinary individuals honored since the program's inception in 1994. Right now, I'd like to ask our beloved past Stoneman Award recipients who are here with us tonight to stand and be recognized. On behalf of my brilliant co-chair, Vice President for Institutional Advancement, Helen Adams-Keene, we would like to acknowledge our gratitude for all who helped make our Kate Stoneman program a reality, including our sister and fellow committee members of the Kate Stoneman Day Committee, whose names are listed in your program, as well as the Women's Law Caucus, who have been wonderful partners with us in this endeavor. It is co-chaired this year by Lauren Palmer and Christina Tripoli, and please join me in a round of applause for them. Helen and I particularly want to give special thanks for the incomparable Tammy Wyman, who makes everything possible in every detail. And tonight, the very creative and technologically expert skills of Chris Rossi, as you'll see in our video presentation. Chris. This has been a great year for women at Albany Law School. About a week ago, we had a panel on great women chiefs, great women, great judges. There have been so many events, so much recognition for many of our women graduates. But we're also at a time where it is very clear that the reason for the Kate Stoneman Day program, the reason for its inception, hasn't gone away. Although for years the rise in women applicants to law school, and every year we'd say, there's 60% women this year in the law school, there's et cetera, since the economy tanked, there has been some regression in this way. Our most recent class, which is not atypical for the nation, was 142 male and 94 female. And the data shows that when the economy goes down, less women go to graduate school. So there's still work to do. There are still battles to wage. There's still partnerships to form. This past year, we lost someone very dear to us, without whom we wouldn't be here tonight. There would have been not the same enthusiasm, passion. There certainly wouldn't have been the funding for the Kate Stoneman program. And I'd like to invite to the podium now someone who is very dear to her to speak about our beloved Minnie Netter, Donna Wardlow, class of 77.
Hello and welcome again. It's a very moving thing for me to be here tonight and to be talking about Minnie. Can you hear me? Minnie is somebody who I've known for many, many years, actually far more than I'm willing to admit to right now. Minnie is, as you know, an Albany Law grad. Minnie was always a pioneer. She was always someone who charted her own course. Minnie did not go to law school directly out of college and taught us all a great deal about balancing things like work and family relationships. Minnie had her family, she raised her family, and then Minnie went to law school. She graduated cum laude from Albany Law in 1972. And she was one of the very, very few women who were in the law school at that time. She was a member of the Justinian Society as well as the Albany Law School, where she was a Commons editor. Mimi graduated from Albany and went on to join what was the largest law firm in the Capital District at the time. And she didn't just go to join it, she actually became one of the first female partners in a major law firm in the Capital District area. That's where Mimi and I first met, because while I was in law school, I clerked at the same firm. It was the Pattison firm in Troy, and I ended up doing my early years of legal practice there. Mimi served as a role model and a mentor to many women, myself included. I think probably one of her greatest gifts to women was the fact that she was always assisting women, trying to help them do what she had been able to do and to share her success with it. And she was extraordinarily generous with other women and of her time and her talents with them. Mimi went on to become general counsel and secretary of MapInfo after her many, many years at the Pattison firm in Troy. And then she semi-retired, but didn't really. Mimi was probably as active or more active after she semi-retired than she ever was beforehand. Mimi was, as many of you know, very, very active in the New York State Bar Association, where she also mentored many women, including Lorraine Tharp and Kate Madigan Grant, who I think all of you know, and who have very close ties to Stoneman and law school. She was president of the Rensselaer County Bar Association. She was a member of the New York State Women's Bar and a charter member and helped organize the Capital District Women's Bar Association. She was also very involved in the Legal Aid Society and was also president of that for quite some time. Mimi's relationship with Albany Law School did not terminate when she graduated. She was always very, very involved here. She actually helped establish the Stoneman Day and the Stoneman Committee. We think it was sometime in 1994, but our records from back then are a little bit fuzzy, let's just say. But she certainly was responsible for it, and as Mary said, I don't think we would be here today if it weren't for Mimi. Mimi received the Kate Stoneman Award in 1996. She was an alumna in residence in that same year, and she helped establish the Kate Stoneman Prize, which is awarded at commencement. She and I worked together very hard on the Kate Stoneman Chair in Law and Democracy, which was founded in 1998. And Mimi and I spent a great deal of time calling up people and knocking on everyone's doors and asking for money, which is something she was very good at. And I'm not as good as she is, but I'm certainly persistent, and you will be hearing more about that before the evening's over. Mimi spoke at many other things at the law school. She was certainly a speaker at many IP programs, was a member of the advisory board for the former Science and Technology Center. So she has done an enormous amount and given so much to this law school. We're all extremely grateful for her time. Mimi did not leave this earth without thinking of Albany Law School. Mimi left a bequest to the law school for a Kate Stoneman Scholarship. And that's what I will be talking to many of you about in the future, because we're asking people to help us build a scholarship in honor of Mimi. It is part of her legacy, and we want to make sure it lives on. Before I invite Mimi's daughter Beth to the podium, we're going to take a moment to remember Mimi. And so I'd like to ask you all to take a look at the screens and remember her for a few minutes with us.
Who's she talking about?
Amy's daughter.
Later. Later.
Okay.
That's me. You're right, in the red.
was amazing. Thank you. This year, to honor the unparalleled commitment that Kate Stoneman stands for, excuse me, that's very moving. The Keynote Award has been permanently named in Mimi's honor. And to recognize this, I would like to invite Beth Netter, Mimi's daughter, to join me at the podium. Good evening. I'll give you the plaque. Okay. Someone, where is the... here we go. Okay. Beth, I'd like to read this to everyone. In honor of the inaugural presentation of Miriam Netter, Class of 1972 Keynote Award, Kate Stoneman Day, March 10th, 2011, Albany Law School. That was a little unnerving to watch that. It was beautiful, so thank you. Thank you for putting that together. Good evening, and thank you so much. It is a privilege to be here with all of you today. I offer my family's gratitude to everyone involved with Albany Law School. And thank you for this beautiful tribute to my mother in naming the Kate Stoneman Keynote Speaker Award in her honor. I believe you will understand how precious this would be for her after hearing more about her life in the world of law. Of the many memorials honoring my mother since her passing last September, this is the only one at which I am speaking. And I think, it's fitting, and as I said, a privilege to do. My mother loved the law. She was bright, loved to read and learn, and was committed to supporting and caring for people. Her light, her energy and stamina were powerful, and in the world of law, as in other aspects of her life, she garnered and focused the light with the intention of being the best person she could be, and in helping others do the same. She had a deep drive to love, to be happy, and to serve. And in her career in law, she had a deep drive to do the right thing. That drive expressed itself in various ways in the legal community. She had a passion for mentoring and leadership development, and felt privileged to nurture and inspire myriad women and men over the years. In 1996, here at Albany Law School on Kate Stoneman Day, an event that Mimi did help create and truly valued, Catherine Richardson, then president-elect of the bar, was being honored, along with Mimi, with the Kate Stoneman Award. After Catherine's inspiring keynote speech, Mimi shared the following wisdom, titled, How to Succeed at Law While Really Trying. 10 Do's and Don'ts for the 90s. And here's how she began. Practicing law is hard work. So, if you do not enjoy reading the law, enjoy interacting with people, enjoy solving rather than creating problems, and enjoy thinking, and if you do require 8 hours of sleep every night, and if you cannot tolerate multiple responsibilities, all of which need immediate attention, then whatever you do not elect to enter the private practice of law. She continued, I'm a happy attorney, and the reason I'm happy is that I enjoy the kind of law I practice, and I am blessed with absolutely terrific clients. But it took me many, many years to attain this state of nirvana. Mimi's attainment of that state of contentment began in her childhood. Her mother, Dora, believed that a strong education and lifelong learning were imperative. Her father, Rabbi Max Maccabee, had a profound influence on her life. He loved her unconditionally. He nurtured, encouraged, and inspired her to meet her potential. At the age of 16,
although young to be attending Brown University, known as Pembroke at the time. She knew she was intellectually and socially ready to be in the world. Just like her childhood heroines, Nancy Drew, Eleanor Roosevelt, Hannah Senesh, and Wonder Woman, and later Kate Stoneman, Mimi's desire to get things moving and to live life fully allowed no other option. The year she graduated, she married my father, Howard Netter. 12 years later, after being a teacher and while raising a young family, she followed her dream of a career in the law and attended Albany Law School. I was about 6 at the time. And while it was a bit unusual in our community for a woman, much less the mother of a 6 and an 8-year-old, to be attending law school, it was a natural next step for my mother to be taking. This world view I had of equality stemmed from my father's clear respect for my mother and her opinions. He encouraged her to become a lawyer. It never occurred to me that it was odd for her to be in law school, as I had become accustomed to women being bright, well-spoken, and strong. I had experienced this firsthand while attending League of Women Voters meetings with my mother since the age of 2. I was shown at an early age that pioneering is simply having a clear vision of a right action with a firm faith that anything is possible, and then getting the job done. This awareness was solidified as I witnessed her intensive and diligent studies during law school. She routinely typed and then retyped her class notes and sections from her books in order to fully assimilate the material. She served as an editor for Law Review and graduated with honors. Her colleague of many years at Patterson-Sampson, Jerry Katzman, shared the following. I watched and learned from Mimi as she represented RPI and Russell Sage College, as she represented Upper Hudson Planned Parenthood, and helped guide the formation and growth of MapInfo as their chief counsel. She represented all her clients with knowledge, skill, and passion. Mimi also furthered the interest of our profession, serving on the board of Rensselaer County Bar Association, various offices, and as its president. She was president of Legal Aid Society and continuously involved, as you know, with this law school. She served as the vice president from the 3rd Judicial District and on the committees of the New York State Bar Association, including its membership committee, the Committee on Attorney Professionalism, and as the leader of the Intellectual Property Law section. Mimi changed me for good, Jerry said. But more importantly, Mimi has caused change for so many people. Mimi shone as a bright sun, changing courses with those around her, constantly working to improve her world. Before her dear friend, Kate Madigan, became president of the New York State Bar Association, she and Mimi spoke of what that association truly needed at that moment in time and agreed that some systemic changes were necessary. The task to be done was not terribly glamorous, but involved essential housekeeping and infrastructure issues that would help the association become stronger, more integrative, collaborative, and relevant to its members. She took on, with alacrity, the chairmanship of the Committee on Committees to help the bar better manage and allocate its limited resources. Kate knew it would be at a minimum a 3-year project. Mimi, who was quite intuitive, knew on a deeper subconscious level that she had only 2 years to make it happen, and insisted that would be all she would need to do it well. During those 2 years, both with this project and with the surgery and chemotherapy treatments she faced, she embodied the wisdom of Mahatma Gandhi, who said, "Strength does not come from physical capacity. It comes from an indomitable will." Through her tenacity, pristine organizational skills, and sheer force of will, she and her committee members worked diligently and got it done. Just as she completed that well-appreciated task, she consciously confronted her mortality, and she was ready. While very much a dynamo on the outside, my mother was incredibly sensitive and loved to love and share love. One of the reasons she was able to transition from this life with such grace was due to the longtime presence of her maid, Carl, whom she had been with since my father's death many years ago. She and Carl shared a passion for the beauty and serenity of nature, especially flowers, as well as travel, the arts, golf, volunteerism, and family. She adored her grandsons, Nate and Jake, who you saw in the photos, and up until the very last days of her life was Skyping with them throughout LA, modeling for them how death, as well as life, can be filled with happiness, love, and grace. And of course, she truly valued and held dear her myriad friends and colleagues, some of which are here today. My mother had faith that women and men like you would serve this, her most beloved profession, with integrity, enthusiasm, and skill. She felt complete in what she had to offer and experience in the world of law and in life. As she so perfectly stated in the month before her passing, I have no bucket list. She was truly at peace, having indeed lived a full and fulfilling life. Our family thanks you so very much for honoring her in this way.
It is with great excitement that we welcome Judge Patricia Wald as our 2011 Kate Stoneman keynote speaker. Her presence here is truly an honor to anyone familiar with her record. Judge Wald first attended Connecticut College on a full scholarship. She was the first member of her family to do so. While there, she was inducted to Phi Beta Kappa and worked during summers greasing ball bearings at a defense plant. She then began her legal career at Yale Law School, at a time when most law schools were still far behind the curve set by this institution when it came to admitting women. Judge Wald was one of a handful of female law students at Yale, where she served as case editor of the Yale Law Journal and graduated with honors. Her stellar academic credentials secured for her the premium perk for graduating law students, a judicial clerkship. Upon graduation, she served as clerk for Judge Jerome Frank of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. Although Judge Wald was not Judge Frank's first female law clerk, she would go on to become, in his words, the best clerk he ever had. With the force of Judge Frank's recommendation, Judge Wald then went to work for the Washington, D.C. law firm then called Arnold, Fortas & Porter. There were very few female lawyers in D.C., and the Bar Association was segregated, so she did not join. Judge Wald remained at Arnold, Fortas & Porter until shortly before she welcomed her first child, a daughter who incidentally would later become a lawyer after attending Yale Law School. There was no maternity leave at the time, but even if there had been, it probably wouldn't have done Judge Wald much good. She would welcome five children within the space of 7 years. A Herculean task, to be sure, and one to which she dedicated her full time for a decade. Judge Wald later joined the legal field when her youngest child was entering kindergarten. She began this journey by providing legal research assistance to a law school classmate who was then writing a book. She drafted footnotes at night once her children were in bed. Judge Wald then teamed up with a different law school classmate to co-author a survey on bail practice and reform. Other books on criminal justice, children's rights, poverty, and women followed, as did a number of policy papers. Her career then took some interesting turns, including time spent as a legal services lawyer and as a member of the public interest law movement. In 1976, she accepted a position as an assistant attorney general for the Office of Legislative Affairs under the Carter administration. At that time, there was only one other woman Assistant Attorney General. In 1979, she would leave the Department of Justice after having been appointed by President Carter to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, frequently referred to as the second most important court in the nation. She was the first woman to be appointed to that court, although there would later be a few others, including her colleague, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. During her 20-year tenure on the D.C. Circuit, Judge Wald authored 830 opinions. She served as the court's chief judge from 1986 until 1991. She retired from the U.S. bench in 1999 after accepting a position as the American representative on the judicial panel of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, located in The Hague. The tribunal was created by the United Nations to address violations of international humanitarian law in the Balkans. Although Judge Wald notes that at the time her familiarity with international law was slight, according to tribunal insiders, upon her arrival in The Hague, she was conversant with all of the dictates of international humanitarian law and had an understanding of the very unique procedural aspects of the Yugoslav Tribunal. Since finishing up her tenure at the Yugoslav Tribunal in 2002, I don't think we can say that she has, in fact, had a retirement. She has written more than 20 law review articles, one of which spawned the idea for my own PhD proposal. It has since been assigned, along with several others, to students in my seminars, and I think I can safely say there are now some Judge Wald groupies here in the audience today. What else has she done? She has trained Iraqi judges on Iraq's High Tribunal, served on the Intelligence Commission on Weapons of Mass Destruction, serves presently as chair of the Open Society Institute's Creative Criminal Justice Initiative, recently agreed to serve on the Constitution Project's Guantanamo Task Force, campaigned door-to-door in 6 states and in the snow in the most recent presidential election. She plays a prominent and important role on the American Society of International Law's International Criminal Court Task Force and has served as a guest blogger on several well-respected blogs. Over the last year on such topics as the representation of women judges on international criminal justice institutions, the impact of war upon women and children, and the role played by the media in the recent WikiLeaks revelations. What's more, she has a sense of humor. This was on full display some years back when she was given the task of introducing her former colleague, who had become Justice Scalia, at a D.C. Circuit Judicial Conference. In welcoming Justice Scalia, Judge Wald noted that she was especially grateful to have been given the introduction because this ensured that she was able to get in a word edgewise before he began. And with that introduction, I'm sure that you are keen to hear her and stop listening to me. Judge Wald, for your record of extraordinary achievement, your commitment to the ideals of Kate Stoneman, we are honored to present you with the inaugural Miriam M. Netter, Class of 1972, Keynote Award.
Thank you, Megan, for that wonderful introduction. I probably should just now sit down and it would be complete. I also want to apologize in advance. I've got one of those late winter, early spring colds, and it's developed into a kind of a mild laryngitis, so bear with me if you will. I'm going to talk about Kate Stoneman Takes Another Journey, Women Lawyers in International Law. Now, Kate Stoneman began her illustrious career as the first woman admitted to the bar in New York State and as a pioneer in the fight for women's suffrage with a journey to Albany University in 1864. She remembered it later as a long and perilous journey, traveled in the middle of the Civil War. But she also recounted it was a, quote, necessary one that marked her entry into the broader world, first teaching, later lawyering, and finally mobilizing, lobbying, legislating, and leading. As she herself declared, again quotes, housekeeping, sewing, cooking, tailoring, domestic nursing, teaching in what she called dame schools, and shop work should not define the perimeters of a woman's aspirations. She sought admission to the bar, again in her own words, quote, chiefly to extend the field of women's activities. And in that she succeeded, despite an initial rebuff by the New York Supreme Court, proclaiming that women lawyers were not a, quote, necessity, and further were without, quote, precedent. At the end of her path-breaking career, Kate Stoneman counseled younger women to, quote, again, take their opportunities as they come. Always there are opportunities to be had. Now, younger women in succeeding generations have done just that. They have carried forth Kate Stoneman's work in some important ways. Women now make up a quarter of the legal profession, 23% of federal judges, and even higher percentage of state judges. They teach in all the law schools, big and small, and especially in this one. They serve in the legislatures and in the governor's offices. Their numbers are not yet adequate by mine and others' aspirational standards, and substantial obstacles do remain to their unfettered progress based primarily on merit. But that journey is not yet over, and while it's had its own variety of, quote, perils akin to Stoneman's, few doubt that its direction is upward, despite the admission statistics. And that's a nice thing for someone in my age bracket to see. As Megan recounted, I went to Yale Law School in the late 40s, graduated in 1951 when women represented 3% of the profession. Harvard and other prominent law schools were not even taking women when I applied. And the 10 women in my class of roughly 160, many of them World War II veterans, not I, but others, were assigned to live in a rickety old house next to the railroad tracks in New Haven, many blocks away from the ivy-covered towers that were put aside for the male students. The New York to Montreal train ran under my window every night for 3 years at midnight. There were, of course, no women on the faculty, but you may be assured our small group of women did not go unnoticed. We were unfailingly called upon in all our classes, especially sought after to play the role of rape plaintiffs in criminal practice trials, but unfortunately not so sought after when job time came around. I remember myself interviewing with a Wall Street firm who candidly told me, too bad, they said, your record is great. You were on law review, but we hired our woman last week. I did get one offer, but at a salary 10% less than my male classmates. Fortunately for me, again, as Megan previewed, a visionary federal judge, Jerome Frank, who taught at the law school, hired me as his law clerk on the recommendation of 2 of my male teachers. I was the only woman to serve as a law clerk in the Second Circuit that year. As Kate Stoneman had predicted, that clerkship was my opportunity, and I embraced it gratefully. Jerry Frank was a brilliant, if slightly eccentric jurist, well before his time in identifying systemic deficiencies in our judicial system, such as an absence at that time of any right to counsel for criminal defendants. He also previewed the influence of judges' personalities and attitudes on their jurisprudence, the risks involved in basing fact-finding on eyewitness identification, and so on. My clerkship left me with a legacy of responsible skepticism about the limits of the law found in books and treatises, and what I hope is a realistic notion of the factors like evolving social norms and new knowledge that also mold the final shape of the law. Judge Frank was a frequent dissenter, as indeed I later turned out to be myself. He saw dissent not as a symptom of instability in a court, but as an opportunity to set the stage for further thought and discussion, not only in other courts and legislatures facing similar issues, but as a guide for future courts to use in evaluating the worth of the majority opinion in the current case. The quote without precedent that Kate Stoneman faced when she sought to seize her opportunity to practice law was never an intractable barrier for Judge Frank or for me. Precedent is important, and it acts as a barrier to whimsical or idiosyncratic judgments, but it can and should not ever be an intractable bulwark for the status quo. As Kate Stoneman herself said presciently, quote, "There are opportunities to be had, and that is true for the development of the law itself as well as for attaining women's rightful place in its development." Alertness to when those opportunities show themselves is an indispensable key to progress in both of those arenas. Opportunities do arise, but so do obstacles to their exploitation. We're all too familiar with the persistent ones in the case of women's careers. Women still want to be wives, partners, and mothers, as well as lawyers and judges. Not all women, maybe, but many. My own mother raised me as a single parent working in a small-town factory. When I married a classmate during the Korean War on active duty in the Navy, I left my job in a Washington law firm, and for more than 10 years, during which I had the 5 children referred to in close succession, I was out of the profession. But that was my choice, and I never regretted it. And it still is the choice among several of my 30 or so former women law clerks, though not usually for that long a hiatus. Motherhood, even full-time motherhood, is also a, quote, opportunity. I admit to being somewhat frustrated that our legal institutions, be they firms, law schools, or public agencies, in some cases the less so, do not as yet seem to have fully recognized that a talented woman lawyer typically has 40 years or more of potential productivity after law school. And if it takes 15 instead of 7 years for her to make partner or to get tenure because of sabbaticals for parental duties, the employer is still getting a bargain. But opportunities do involve risks. When I did go back to the law in the 1960s, it was to a succession of part-time, often temporary, modestly paid jobs, but, and it's a big but, they were often with new and exciting change-seeking projects in the law itself. First, my work was with the Bobby Kennedy Justice Department in bail reform, later service as a storefront lawyer with the Legal Services Program for the Poor, still later policy reform in the areas of crime, violence, and riots, the riots that punctuated the turbulent 60s, ending up in the 70s as the litigating director of a public interest law firm. Learning to litigate from and with young lawyers 10 years my junior. But we brought unprecedented cases on the rights of mentally ill persons to community services, the rights of kids with special needs to appropriately individualized education in public schools, and the humane treatment of institutionalized children in juvenile institutions. Someone once remarked of my generation of women, we had to build our own career ladders, just as Kate Stoneman did before us. Sure, there were rebuffs. I once was required in open federal court to identify myself by my married name rather than my professional one. It took me several humiliating moments in front of my client and opposing counsel to figure out what that judge was after. But ironically, in many of these jobs, women predominated even back then, whether from lack of opportunity in more traditional legal jobs or because of an instinct to go for the cutting edge of change in the law. They found opportunities in new places that benefited them as well as society and the profession. There is, I think, a lesson to be learned there from that experience, where there will be new and different opportunities for this generation of young women lawyers if they are willing to take risks in short-term returns that will translate into long-term career investments. Now, I'm only going to mention briefly a few other lessons I learned along my journey. One is how big a role pure luck plays in our lives. I had a lot of luck in terms of the times in which I re-entered the law. By 1976, President Carter was looking for women with experience to fulfill a campaign promise of putting more women in government. He did just that in terms of sub-cabinet positions and in unprecedented numbers of women appointed as agency general counsels. I remember a male colleague once saying, "Oh, the general counsel, it's a woman's job now." In my legislative capacity, I helped to pass an omnibus judgeship bill in 1978, which created 150 new federal judgeships, to which the president appointed dozens of women. Leadership counts for a great deal. Every president since President Carter, whatever party he has come from, has managed to keep the number of women appointees well ahead of what they were before. My own luck held on later in being nominated for the D.C. Circuit, the first woman, but ironically, my nomination was opposed by some conservative groups who called me anti-family and wild and wacky because of advocacy I had done on behalf of children's rights. The administration, however, stuck with me, and I made it through, later to become the first woman judge on the circuit and the second woman federal judge in judicial federal history. The other lesson is that although we need more women on our courts, I truly believe they do have unique experiences and insights drawn from those experiences that deserve to find voice in our courts. But all women, including women judges, are not fungible. Their qualifications need to be evaluated on their records and proven competence, their temperaments, and yes, their judicial philosophies. Indeed, not all women are friends or even sympathetic to other women and their aspirations. Often the women judges on the courts I've served on didn't vote together, but in the main they did provide necessary intelligent grist for the judicial mill. But women have also, it's been noted, turned out to be unduly good administrators. And my theory is that, at least in part, that's a direct result of having to do all that home management duty judicial. Finally, and this has been remarked by the eloquent speaker that came before, gender equity is a two-way street, and I don't want to conclude the retrospective part of my remarks without recognition of those visionary men who helped so many of us on our journey. In my own case, my recently departed husband, who literally made every step of my career possible with tolerance, enthusiasm, massive logistic support, and wise counsel. Ruth Ginsburg reportedly answered when asked what advice she had for younger women who might want to parallel her own career: marry the right man. Now, I would enlarge that these days to marry the right partner. Now, perhaps that's not the answer for all women, but for some of us, it was very apt advice. But now let me switch gears to the second journey I think Kate Stoneman, if she were alive today, might have made. That's the journey overseas to the arena of international courts, international humanitarian law, and human rights. At age 71, I left the D.C. Circuit to make that trip by accepting an appointment as a judge on the Hague-based International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, shorthand ICTY, established in 1993 to try perpetrators of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide committed in the Balkan Wars of the early 90s, the first international court since Nuremberg in 1945. Now, skeptics back then, when it was established, said it was just a sop for the Western democracies who refused to use force to stop the horrendous atrocities being committed in the Balkan Wars by all sides, but predominantly against Bosnian Muslims. Others labeled the new court paper tiger, with no police force of its own to seize suspects or carry out sentences, fated always to rely on the not always reliable goodwill of supporting allies to enforce its judgments. The UN appointed 14 judges from nominations by member states and picked the prosecutor. Contradicting that famous line from the movie Field of Dreams, build the field and they will come, for several years no accused came to the tribunal, until in 1995 a relatively low-level perpetrator was handed over by German authorities and the trials began. But by the time I arrived in 1999, there were several defendants awaiting trial who had either voluntarily surrendered or been handed over by country authorities. In the interim, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda had been set up to try the genocide cases resulting from the terrible 1994 massacres. I was one of only 2 women judges on the ICTY, though my immediate American predecessor had also been a woman, Gabby McDonald, a former trial court judge from Texas. But the international court scene was definitely a new place for women. There had been no women judges in Nuremberg. Indeed, the word rape appears in no Nuremberg indictment, though evidence abounded as to its widespread commission in World War II and in the Nazi occupation. That act was disguised under the more polite rubric of crimes of honor, inhumane treatment, or some such, and words do matter. The role of a few significant women on the prosecutorial staff in Nuremberg had been pretty much downplayed in all accounts of the proceedings that I had read, and there were, of course, no women to negotiate at the peace table. The absence of women in international justice circles was particularly ironic, since women, along with children, have always been the predominant victims, civilian victims of war crimes, as well as 75% of refugee and displaced persons. In the Yugoslav conflict alone, there were an estimated 20,000 victims of sexual assault. One estimate reported every female over the age of 12 in Rwanda who survived the genocide had been raped. The advent of the new courts did signal an important change for women, though their numbers were still small. Eventually, 2 of the 4 ICTY chief prosecutors were women. The judges were not so plentiful. When I was there had never been more than 3 out of 14 women on the court. As I was leaving at the end of 2001, the sole remaining woman judge was in danger of not being reelected, and it took much behind-the-scenes maneuvering at the UN to ensure that she stayed. Now, 10 years later, there's still only 1 woman permanent judge on the ICTY, though there are several additional temporary ad-litem judges who sit on 1 or 2 particular cases. In the international and hybrid courts, which followed the ICTY and were set up to try war crimes committed in Sierra Leone, Cambodia, East Timor, Liberia, there have usually been 3 or 4 women out of a dozen or more judges, but the best record by far resides in the permanent International Criminal Court, the ICC, which operates under the Rome Statute and is required by statute to elect a, quote, fair number of women. Presently, that has been translated into 11 out of 18 women on the court. And women staffers and chambers aides, likened to our law clerks, account for nearly half of the non-judge personnel at the ICC, though disappointingly, they still tend to be clustered in the lower level positions. Most promising, however, international women groups have sprung up to monitor the appointments to these courts and complain about low levels of women appointees and lobby for more. With the introduction of women, albeit not enough, on these courts has come a unique recognition of the strategic and tactical use that perpetrators of war have always made of sexual crimes. They were not, it turned out, just the unauthorized malfeasance of rogue soldiers. Massive rapes and sexual violence, forced marriages, sexual exploitation of all kinds were in truth instruments of war and torture, calculated to terrorize civilian populations and even to promote genocide. Initially, not even all the prosecutors were attuned to this recognition, and women judges played a pivotal role in bringing these concepts to the fore. One writer has pointed out that in every one of the first 5 cases at the ICTY and ICTR that highlighted the critical nature of gender crimes in wartime, women judges were on the bench to insist that such accusations be explored thoroughly. I can attest myself to the fact that some of the judges hailed from countries where women were still living in the shadows, consigned to their homes, subject to male dominance in all aspects of their lives. Those judges didn't always come to this new jurisprudence of gender-oriented war crimes easily, but eventually a vigorous body of international law on women's rights and abuses has been developed, virtually from scratch in these courts. Special advisors on women's issues have been established in the prosecutors' offices, and special rules have been adopted by rape reflecting the progressive jurisprudence in national judicial systems, such as not needing corroboration, no excursions into the victim's sexual past, etc. This has been due in large part to the lobbying efforts of international women's groups. Victims and witnesses units have been set up to provide protection and counseling for the fragile survivors of horrible atrocities who agree to come forth to testify in the courts, sometimes at risk to their own safety. Collaterally, and here I can congratulate some of the Albany faculty, the number of women scholars commenting on the works of the court has seemed to escalate precipitously. No longer could defense lawyers dare to make the argument that one of them did in the court that I was on, that these crimes against women were not, quote, serious enough to require international justice. Now, all of this is to the good, but again to quote from one of my predecessor, Kate Stoneman, keynoters, the price of women's equality is eternal vigilance. Women throughout the world need rights protection in peacetime as well as wartime. And there are so many countries where they have virtually no rights, and as of now, so little international protection against the abuse of their rights. We do have things like CEDAW, which is the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which the U.S. has not yet ratified, which require signatories' adherence to gender anti-discrimination norms, but its enforcement powers are mainly limited to monitoring progress and persuasion. Numerous UN resolutions have been passed on the subject of gender equality, but even if they were effectively implemented, a goal far from current achievement, these vehicles concentrate mainly on blatant discriminations and ignore the critical but subtle discriminations that oppress women in seemingly neutral fields like population control, education, environment development, housing. A holistic view of women's special roles as caregivers in the world is necessary to bring about meaningful equalities. One of my other talented women law clerks, the ICTY, wrote, as long as men make the decisions for women, irrespective of how well-intentioned they may be, the particular experiences of women in armed conflict will always be overlooked. And that goes for rights in peacetime as well. I think this is an especially propitious time to aid those in the international field who work for the advancement of women's rights in states like Egypt and its neighbors, which will be considering, hopefully, new constitutions for a democratic society to replace former autocracies. The New York Times published an article just yesterday, which I quote very briefly from, said, quote, at its height, roughly 1/4 of the million protesters who poured into Tahrir Square each day were women, veiled and non-veiled women, who shouted, fought, and slept in the streets alongside men, upending traditional expectations about their behavior. Yet, the committee of experts appointed to revise the Constitution did not contain a single woman, or even, in the Times words, anyone with a gender-sensitive perspective. 42% of Egyptian women can't read or write. No women are political leaders. The challenge is to make sure that the women maintain their involvement as the nation lurches forward so that their contribution to the revolution will not be forgiven. That is a big task. And the International Criminal Court, to which the U.S. still does not belong, but with which it is at least now engaging constructively after years of vigorous opposition, is clearly the flagship of future international criminal law. Because we don't belong, U.S. influence is limited. U.S. citizens, although they work there, will not cannot occupy the highest policy positions as judges or prosecutors. But there are opportunities with ICC supporting groups which wage continued campaign to ensure that gender-related crimes are included in the formal charges brought against high-level perpetrators. To date, they have been very successful. At this point, in all but one of the pending active cases at the ICC, gender charges are included. But issues like the adequacy of protection for victims or for intermediaries who assist in obtaining evidence remain. The ICC cases allow for victim participation, but outreach efforts to assure women find out about that option have been spotty, and there's a backlog of 900 such applications yet to be processed. Rape and sexual molestation continue as a dominant instrument of torture and war in northern Sudan, Uganda, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Central African Republic, throughout the African continent, and elsewhere. The core principle of the ICC is so-called complementarity. That is, when the ICC prosecutor decides to investigate a situation or bring a case, the country whose nationals are involved or where the alleged crimes took place can intercede and promise to conduct its own proceedings. And unless the ICC prosecutor can show the court the country is unwilling or unable to conduct decent, honest proceedings, he has to suspend the ICC's action and let the country have a go at it. This means that national courts can be expected to take an increasingly active part in prosecuting women's war crimes, and given the sorry state of resources in so many of the underdeveloped countries, their need for assistance will be immense. Already we do have American-based humanitarian and human rights organizations like Global Rights, the International Association of Women Judges, doing fantastic work in training local country judges and personnel, as well as women themselves, about their rights and access to courts, how to face down officials who rebuff them, and how to write wills and contracts. The American Bar Association, in connection with Justice Initiative, a program whose board I serve, is helping to run several mobile rape courts in the Congo to bring gender justice into remote villages where it had never been operated before. In Bosnia, women are being trained to identify and resist something called sextortion, demands by persons of apparent authority, prison guards, employers, etc., for sexual favors in return for better treatment. There are, in brief, many new opportunities for women to claim their prerogative in the pursuit of justice. And I'm sure if she were here, Kate Stoneman might well be making that journey overseas to, in her own words, expand the activities of women in ways that affect them so critically. Kate Stoneman and other pioneering women lawyers continue to inspire us and to raise our spirits in the face of transitory disappointments in our own careers or in the progress of women generally in our profession. Firsts, as she demonstrated, are important, but only if firsts are followed by seconds and thirds and on down the line. She passed the torch to my generation, and we in turn pass it to the younger women in whom she had such faith and to whom I wish great success and Godspeed in finding the new opportunities she talked about. And I will be forever grateful to the Albany Law School, to the sponsors and organizers of this wonderful event for allowing me to participate in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Wald, for sharing your uniquely rich story and the provocative sort of insights and challenges for us. I also need to thank visiting Professor Megan Fairley, not only for her introduction, but I'm going to tell a tale on Megan for 1 second. We wanted to get Judge Wald here desperately. And so I sent out an email over the faculty. Does anyone know her? Does anyone have a contact with her? And Professor Fairley said, well, I cite her in my articles. I'm a big fan. Let me see what I can do. And then she sent an email, and then she called me and said, Mary, it's kind of a stalker's email. She'll either come or she'll get a restraining order. So we're so glad you did not get a restraining order, but instead you accepted our invitation. Thank you. It is now my honor to present the second award of the evening to Margaret Maggie Clemens, class of 1984. While in law school, Maggie worked full-time as a waitress while raising 4 daughters as she pursued her dream to become a lawyer. Because of her considerable legal skills and reputation and her qualities as a leader, Littler Mendelsohn sought her to open and head their Rochester office. Maggie serves on the firm's Women's Leadership Initiative and Diversity and Inclusion Council, whose mission is to foster and develop leadership opportunities for women in a variety of ways. She is a past member of the board of directors for Girl Scouts and Brownies, still actively involved. She is the past president of Alternatives for Battered Women and recipient of its Restore the Hope Award, really the equivalent of a Lifetime Achievement Award. She is actively involved with our law school's Rochester alumni group and committed to supporting the law school and the success of our alumni. Sheila Gaddis, who's the executive director of the Teleska Center for Justice, said, Mahatma Gandhi suggested we should be the change you want to see in the world. Truly, through her years of work on behalf of both individual victims of domestic violence and agencies such as the Volunteer Legal Services Project and Alternatives for Battered Women, Maggie Clemens is the change she wishes to see in the world. Her pro bono contributions to ADW board service have had a tremendously positive impact on women, as well as future generations of their families. For her tireless efforts in empowering women, I am thrilled to present the 2011 Kate Stoneman Award to Maggie Clemens.
Thank everybody here at the law school and for the people on this Kate Stoneman committee for awarding me this very wonderful honor. I feel a little intimidated to speak after Judge Wald and all your wonderful accomplishments and hearing about your mother, and she must have been terrific, and I wish I knew her. I will say that I want to thank a few people, and I wanted to start with thanking Albany Law School. I did start working full-time as a waitress when I was supporting the 4 kids when I was here, and I went to see, I think he was assistant dean at the time, Jack Welch, to say, I'm dying here. So he ended up, law school gave me some money to help fund me so I could then concentrate more on my law school career. What it taught me is in leaving law school is really the importance of giving a helping hand to those who really need it, to not just concentrate on my career, but remember that there were women and others out there less fortunate than I was who could use help. And that's what I started to do when I went to Rochester. When I moved there, I began becoming involved with both Volunteer Legal Services Organization, where Sheila Gaddis works. I'll have to thank her for that Mahatma Gandhi quote, much more articulate than me, and our local battered women's shelter, which is Alternatives for Battered Women. I will say, though, that representing battered women over the years, even on a pro bono basis, has given me back a lot more than I gave the women I represented. I learned that people could be strong and resilient and courageous through a very chaotic time in their life. And that was an example to me, and I've taken that in. So I was forever grateful to all of my clients who taught me those things. I will say that when you talk about all the international stuff, that's here too. That's here in our homes, in our streets, in our communities. And particularly when you have people from other cultures coming here who really think it's okay to kill their daughter because she's dating the wrong person, which happened in Rochester this year. Or who slit the throat of a woman who was age 18 who happened to be my client because she wanted to leave him after having been married at 13 against her will. So there are those kinds of cases out there in our own communities. So those of you who have an opportunity to think about making a difference, you have the time and the talent and the skills to do that, and the law school's given you that. So hopefully you can think about that as you go forward. I do have to thank, though, I have a wonderful family. My 4 daughters, 8 grandchildren, my life partner who's here, who are without, I would not be able to really know the best part of life, and that's having loved ones who support you. That's what's really important. You should keep that in mind as you go forward, and I'm sure people here know that, as you did with your mother. I'm sure she was very proud of you, too. I have to thank, too, and mention my parents. My dad passed away a couple of years ago, but my mom is still alive. They taught me the importance of education. My dad graduated from college when I graduated from high school. My mother, who was raising 5 kids and working, graduated with straight A's from college the year I graduated law school. So I think I did want to mention and thank them. And thank you very much. I'm very proud and happy to be among the wonderful women who previously have gotten the award, and very honored by this. Thank you.
I also have the honor of presenting the final award of this evening to Maria Melendez, class of 1992. And as we can see, Maria brought 3 of the men in her life, very handsome men, I must say, very well-behaved young men also. I didn't mean that to your husband. Maria was one of the first Latina law partners in a large New York City law firm. It is not surprising, with Maria's leadership on key committees, associates, diversity, hiring, women in leadership, that Sidley was named as a best law firm for women by Working Mother magazine and Flex Time Lawyers Consultancy, and the firm has been included in the Yale Women's list of top 10 family-friendly firms. In addition to her extremely busy and successful practice, Maria's hard work, dedication, and seriousness of purpose make her an invaluable participant in the work done by each of these committees. Maria somehow finds the time to also be involved with In Motion, Inc., a public service organization that provides free legal services to indigent and working poor women in New York City. She is also a member of the Board of Directors of Latino Justice, Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, or PRLDEF, a longstanding civil rights advocacy organization. She is actively involved with the law school's New York City alumni group and committed to supporting the law school and the success of our alumni. She has participated on the Women in Litigation panel, which she moderated in fall of 2009. And I'd like to close with a quote from Lauren Blumenthal-Kleiman, a partner at Sidley Austin. The most effective mentors for women are those individuals who see their roles as personal as well as professional. Maria's career and the choices she has made makes her an ideal role model for individuals who are truly dedicated to creating and expanding opportunities for professional women. Maria, for exemplifying the ideals of Kate Stoneman and serving as an inspiration and role model for women in the legal profession, I am truly pleased to present to you the 2011 Kate Stoneman Award.
Wow, thank you. I've been had a wonderful day today. It's been a whirlwind, and my head is spinning. And thank you so much, Professor Lynch, and thank you to the Albany Law School for this tremendous honor. I feel sometimes since I've gotten the call that I was getting this award that they must have made a mistake. But thank you. I'll take it anyway. And also before I would like to thank my family who's here, and to quote Judge Wald, I did marry the right man. And Jim, thank you so much for your unconditional love and support. And thank you to my son Matthew and Joshua, who have been very well behaved. So thank you. I love you guys. One of the most enjoyable things that I have come to appreciate about Kate Stoneman since I have been studying her these last few weeks is that there was nothing shy
or ordinary about her. She was blessed with tremendous courage, compassion, a keen sense of right and wrong, and an awareness and sensitivity to the importance of equality and fairness for all. And she shared her gifts and talents freely and worked tirelessly on behalf of all, men and women of all backgrounds, of all circumstances. And because she gave so freely and she led by example, today we can stand here, I can stand here and rejoice and celebrate the many wonderful things that have changed in our society that allow for a Puerto Rican girl from very humble beginnings, raised in Brooklyn, to go to a law school as amazing as this one, to be admitted to practice law in New York and elsewhere, and to rise to become a partner at one of the most prestigious and wonderful law firms in the world. And for all of these blessings, I am eternally grateful to Kate Stoneman and to other pioneers like her who have helped to pave the way for people like me and for people like you in the audience. And although I am so grateful and honored for these blessings, I am very, very troubled by the fact that even though we women represent approximately half of the lawyers in private practice, we hold only approximately 17% of the partnerships. And if you are a woman of color, that statistic drops significantly down to about 1.7%. And I always tell my boys, I'm 1.7% of the partners across the country, which is not a good thing in my view. And unfortunately, the statistics, the comparable statistics for our sisters in government and in-house and in the judiciary are not appreciably better. So on Monday, perhaps you may have seen this, New York Law Journal actually ran an article reporting on a conference that was held at the Association of the Bar in the City of New York, the principal purpose of which was to shine a light on the fact that there's a tremendous absence, a virtual absence, I think is the way it was characterized, of women litigators in the state courts throughout the country. And to me, as a litigator myself, that sort of drew my attention rather immediately. And this astounding observation is one in which I just remark at, because we're in 2011. We're talking about 2011. We're not talking about 1898. And to me, it just grabbed my attention. And it's also especially something that grabbed my attention in light of the fact, because of the work of Kate Stoneman and because of the work of other pioneers like her, we know that we are blessed, the legal profession is blessed with many talented minority and women lawyers. And to quote Judge Batts, who was of the Southern District, was at the conference last week, for some reason we have let me quote her exactly so I don't get it wrong. What she said was, we have an incredibly deep bench, and we should be using them. And unfortunately, we're not using them, and we're certainly not using them to the extent that we should. And this is a complex topic for another day that I won't get into right now. But regardless of the reasons why we're not using our talented women and minority lawyers, the one thing that I do know is that we owe it to ourselves and to each other, and we certainly owe it to the legacy of Kate Stoneman to do something about it. And in the last few weeks, as I've thought about what it is that we should do, I've asked myself, well, what would Kate do, right? And two things immediately came to mind. The first is clearly she would not have given up. And the temptation to give up is one that is very strong. Sometimes I feel it every now and again myself, I must confess. But being a woman in the legal profession is an exhausting and sometimes very frustrating existence. But I know that we cannot walk away, and I certainly know that Kate would not walk away. She was someone that I wish I knew. I wish I could go back in time and know. But from what I have read about her, she was someone who had boundless energy, and she had what I like to think of as gumption. And I know that instead of walking away, I imagine that she would have taken a deep breath. She would have taken perhaps a power nap, and she would have gotten right back at it, right? And what would she have done? I think that the answer to that question came to me as I tried to summarize in a word or two what it was that was so extraordinary about her in the 1800s. And while there were many, many things that stand out, above all else, she was visible. And for those of NBA fans and NFL fans in the audience, I also want to borrow from a quote that Kobe Bryant delivered in a T-shirt or a jersey to Michael Vick in the playoff this past season. If you may recall, the jersey was signed by Kobe Bryant and said, "Be epic." And that epic is a word that comes to mind when I think of Kate Stoneman. So she was visible and she was epic. And putting those two thoughts together, I'm sure if she were with us today, she would not lament. She would not lament the fact that we were still often the only or one of a few in corporate America. Nor would she allow herself to think that her opinions, her analysis, her thoughts, her insights, her views were somehow less worthy than those of her male counterparts, or convince herself, as sometimes we women do, that we should not speak at an important meeting or at a court hearing or at a negotiation session for fear that others may view us as inferior. On the contrary, I'm convinced that what she would have done is she would have said, "I'm going to bring it." Right? She would have been visible. She would have dazzled them with her competence and her confidence, and by the end of that meeting, or by the end of that court hearing, or by the end of that negotiation session, everyone in that room would have known her name. I'm 100% sure of that would have been the case. And her credibility would have soared, and soon she would have been known among her peers and her clients as the go-to lawyer for this or that issue. So imagine where we would be if more women in our profession tapped into that gumption and became more visible. And what if, like Kate, we actively mentored and spread our competence, our confidence, and our credibility? And imagine where we would be if many more of our male colleagues actively and visibly embraced and encouraged their female colleagues to lead the way. Imagine where we would be. Thank you so much.
Before we close for the evening, I want to call your attention to downstairs, when we recessed downstairs to the foyer. Last year, a niece of Kate Stoneman was here with us and donated to the law school pieces of memorabilia of Kate, including one of her dresses. And it is downstairs in the foyer. It's in a glass case. Ask any of us from the law school to direct you to it. It's just wonderful to have sort of a piece of Kate here with us tonight. On behalf of Dean Guernsey, who, by the way, thank you for always funding this program and our efforts on this behalf. And for having the wisdom to put such wonderful women in charge of it. Thank you on behalf of the Kate Stoneman Committee for being here today, and please join our award recipients and the law school community at a reception in the East Foyer downstairs.